So I think that video shows some really interesting areas from Daniel Goldman, one of the leading sort of people in respected people in emotional intelligence. He talked about it being about how we handle ourselves. He talked about there being 4 parts, but I thought it was interesting. He said about it was also about marshalling our positive emotions. So, not getting too excited, not just about the bad ones. He said we could learn it. He said it was about repeated experience, and we're going to talk more about reflection and how that comes on, but we need to practice it. He talked about the percentage of things it changes in education as well, but that can be transferred to the workplace, about productivity being increased, etc. And he mentioned the leaders who are sons of a bitches and how they're actually going against a lot of the time what the organisation is promoting in the sort of values and the culture. He talked about us becoming more emotionally intelligent, and he's not really a believer, so we're not really doing very well and we need to develop it, which is what we're talking about. Later bits, he talked about women being better than men at certain areas, and males do tend to struggle with empathy a lot of the time, and we'll talk about that. But he did say once people become leaders, there seems to be no difference. They're very equal, so we do learn it and we do develop it. Good bosses develop good emotional intelligence. So let's have a look at a couple of the key areas that Goldman talked about. Goldman focused on some key areas, the first being self-awareness, and I'm not going to talk about that in much detail now because that's what we're talking about overall. He then talked about self-regulating or self-management, and he said leaders who regulate themselves rarely launch into verbal attacks on others. They don't make rushed emotional decisions. They don't stereotype people, compromise their values. They regulate themselves. They stay under control. They have the flexibility and personal accountability to keep things under control. They know what their values are. They stick to them. They hold themselves accountable, and they don't go around blaming others. And they stay calm. It takes practice, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail. They show empathy. He talked about leaders having empathy, and it's critical if you're going to be successful in a team or an organization. You need to have empathy to put yourselves in the position of others' situation, and it helps you develop a team. You act fairly, you give constructive feedback, and you listen to the people who need it and talk to those who need it. You don't make assumptions or judge people on your own values or beliefs, because that's dangerous. If you want to earn the respect and loyalty of your team, to build that relationship, then you need to show you're caring for them by being empathetic. You need to have good social skills. It's all about building relationships. Leaders who do well have good social skills, and they're good communicators. They're good at hearing bad news and good news. They act in the right way. They know how to deal with certain people and other. For example, they know how to give an arm around the shoulder to some people, but not to others, because that might be uncomfortable for some people. They're good at managing change and resolving conflicts in a diplomatic way. And they rarely leave things and just ignore them. They tend to focus on getting things done, and working with people and setting an example by their own behaviour. And finally, motivation. They're self-motivated and work towards goals. They don't need to be pushed all the time, and they have an extremely high standard which they like to bring their team along with them. So there's sort of areas that Goldman was talking about in his theory. There are many other theories, and we'll look at a couple in the next couple of slides. So, as I said, Goldman not the only person to have a theory around emotional intelligence. Another respected review is Salovoy and Mayer, 1997, and they propose that we have a cognitive ability consisting of 4 different abilities, so mental skills that are part of general intelligence, and they said they were around perception, facilitation, understanding, and management of our emotions. So what were they talking about? Well, in the first one, they were talking about our ability to perceive, recognize our emotions, our self-emotions, and other people's emotions. And this includes the sort of non-verbal signals we're receiving, that is said in Morabian's rule to be 55% of what we're communicating. So they're obviously really important. It also includes such things as emotional stimulus, such as, I don't know, art, pictures, scenery, things that we see that bring back memories or stimulate things within us. And we need to be aware of those with people. They then talked about emotional facilitation, and they said there was 3 ways that it happens. First, the signaling of different emotions in important situations or environmental changes. So when we're in different situations, it signals different emotions. It also talked about our changing moods, and that can be due to the time of day, whether we're tired, how we feel, you know, anything that's going on in our lives, and how that makes us look at things differently. And then they talked about the different types of reasoning. Some things we reason on emotions, some things we reason on fact. So how we facilitate those things can make a massive difference. They then talked about understanding our emotions and having knowledge of them. We looked at 4 types, just the basics: angry, happy, sad and scared. And we talked about the way they sort of are triggered and the reactions and blending of them, and how one can lead to another. And then the final bit they talked about was how we manage our emotions, and that sort of speaks for itself, but it's being able to control our own emotions and realizing the impact our emotions can have on other people. So just have a look at one more theory on the next slide. So another was Petridis and Furnham, later 2001, and this is a trait approach. So the trait models say that it is not necessarily an intelligence, not emotional intelligence. They say it's more about natural traits or facets that we all possess, and we've all got them at differing levels. They said there were 15 distinct components, and they're listed there in the table. If it's not an intelligence, and it's about abilities we've got, then we need to develop the skills to use those abilities, and that's what we need to develop as part of the emotional intelligence. But some suggestions in some of the trait theories that it's more about a moral quality or a conscience that we have than a skill, and that some of us have got more of a conscience than others, you know, and lots of people have these different approaches to it, but it's either the Goldman approach of the things that we need to be aware of in the key areas, or it's natural traits that we've got. Whichever it is, we need to develop them, and we'll look at some steps for how we can develop them as part of our as part of our self-awareness in the next thing, when we look at some steps that we can use to develop them. So, as we said, Daniel Goldman talking about his factors in becoming more emotionally intelligent, and he talked about the first one about self-awareness. So we're going to look at 8 steps for being more self-aware. The first is about being objective about yourself, and that's not easy. We'll talk more about that. The second is about keeping a journal, and we'll be encouraging you to do that for this qualification. The third is about writing down your goals, your plans and your priorities, because if you write them down, it can help. The fourth is about practicing some sort of daily self-reflection. The fifth is about practicing some sort of mindfulness or meditation, and that'll get a bit of a laugh when we talk about it. The sixth is taking some sort of personality or psychometric test to help you. The seventh is about asking a trusted friend to describe yourself, describe how they see you. And the eighth is asking for feedback and seeking feedback. So we'll go through those individually and put a bit of flesh on those. So let's flesh those out a bit. The first, be objective. Trying to see yourself as you think others might see, or what you really think, is a very difficult process. But if you make the right efforts, it can be extremely self-rewarding and sort of quite a good feeling. When you're able to see yourself objectively, you can start to accept some of the things. We're not, much as we like to admit, we're not all perfect. So what can we do to start this process? Well, we can try first by trying to write down what our perceptions are of how we are, thinking about what we're good at doing and what we think we need to improve. Secondly, add to that things that you're sort of particularly proud of, achievements that you've made, accomplishments. Now, they could be in your role, but also some of the things that you've done in your life, which you might be able to bring into the reflection. And then think about times when you felt that you've accomplished something, or when you've been happy, and what has changed since then, or what has continued since then. And finally, get some feedback. Encourage others to be honest to you about what they think, they feel about you, and take what they say to heart. So it's about being proactive and going out there and asking for that feedback rather than waiting for it to come. The next one, keep a journal, always gets people to feel a bit unsure. We're not saying you need to do it all the time like some sort of diary and anyone's going to read it, but it's going to be for you. We're going to ask you to do it for this qualification because it fits in with Unit 5 about self and managing yourself and reflecting on yourself, and a good way of showing that is a journal. So you'll be writing down things in your journal related to your goals and to your thoughts. So you'll be thinking about the things that you feel, not what you've done, but the things you feel and how you felt about it. It gives you space to think about some new ideas. It's surprising that when you write stuff down sometimes how different it seems, and also doing it when it actually happens rather than waiting until the end of the day when your judgment has changed. It's about listening to your inner voice. There's nothing right or wrong there, and it's about you writing down how you felt and how mindful you are that others might have felt. And sometimes that is that little bit of self-reflection that you as a leader need to do, because you need to be thinking about how people working under you are likely to view you. Think about how you can help other people and if you could possibly do more. Reflect on your values and what is important to you now, and see how that fits in what is important to other people. The third one is about writing down your goals, priorities and plans. Planning your goals and writing them down can be an important way of doing that. You don't have to write it as a list. It could be a mind map that can help you identify your real motivation, and then from that you can form a step-by-step process. It's about breaking things down into the little parts that make up the goal, and then they can seem less overwhelming. I did something similar when I first left the forces. I was in the forces and I left, and I had to decide what I was going to do and what my priorities were. And I used a mind map. And in my case, it all come down to providing for my family was the main objective for me, and I managed to bridge everything around that. But writing it down really helped me reflect and go through the process. Because when I started my own business, I knew I was going to be working a lot of hours. I had to justify why I was putting that much time, because that goes against being my family, but it allowed us to have the flexibility and the money to achieve things that we wanted to do. 4 is about performing some sort of daily self-reflection. In order to be self-aware, you must do some self-reflection. That requires setting some time aside, and I decided personally that I was going to spend some time at the end of each day. In a busy working environment, sometimes you're thinking, oh, I haven't got time to this, I haven't got time to this, and you're rushing until the last minute. Actually spending half an hour at the end of the day could be the best half an hour you ever spend, because that's when you can reflect on what's happened and start planning what you're going to do for the next time. And setting that time aside, it soon becomes a habit. It's a way of ending the day. Some people do it when they're travelling back home. It might be reflecting their mind, but you've just got to keep your focus on driving at the same time. But it will improve your effectiveness and help you reflect on what you've done and what you've achieved. The next one I said sometimes gets people to sort of laugh. It says practice meditation and then other mindfulness habits. Now, we're not talking about, when people talk about meditation a lot of time, they start thinking about some sort of Buddha hippie-like, and I, if that's what you like to do, but really what we're just talking about is having a system to follow which focuses on you having a bit of quiet time with some breathing and helps you do a bit of self-reflection and asking yourself questions like, what is your goal? Am I working towards that goal? What are you doing that is actually acting as a hindrance to your success? What could you do that would improve the process moving forward? And as I said, sometimes just that process of writing it down can be, of thinking about what you've written down can be the process rather than just writing it. So in that thing, you're reflecting on what you've written. It then talks about taking personality or psychometric tests. We're going to talk about some tools, but these can help you understand yourself and your traits. There are some popular tests aimed, and we'll look at MBTI, ILM-72 and some others later on in the tools section. And they are psychometric tests They are standard and scientific methods used to measure individuals' mental capabilities and behavioural styles. I did one a few years ago, the MBTI, and I don't think it's everything to everybody, but it certainly is a tool that helps you to look at yourself, which is what we're talking about, self-awareness. There are no right or wrong answers in those tests. Instead, you are just asked to go with your natural feeling, and then it looks at where you might fit in to the sort of brackets they've got. Ask trusted friends. Step 7, ask trusted friends to describe you. How are you supposed to know what people feel about you or think about you if you don't ask them? You've got to make sure that you're picking friends who are going to be open and honest and are critical, and you need to make them feel safe while they're telling you their honest views. It's sometimes not easy to hear. They need to know that they're not doing it to hurt you, but trying to help you. And you need to just give them the freedom, maybe some steering points, but you just need to give them the freedom so they know they can just tell you what they want. Maybe it's just about giving them some clarity so they completely understand which areas you're looking at, rather than your clothes taste or whatever. You're talking about your leadership styles or what you do, how you go about, what your social skills are like. You could also, if there's a particular area, ask a friend to point it out to you whenever they see it. For example, if you're a tendency to be someone who, when people are telling stories, you like to get one up on and start saying, well, if they've done 50, you've done 100, then you can ask them to discreetly let you know when you're starting to do it, and then you can learn when it's coming, you can stop it. And that fits into asking for feedback at work, because they're from your friends and family, you've consulted with them. You might have a feedback process at work where you regularly get supervisions or feedback from somebody, so there might be a formal process in place. If not, you can seek feedback from your colleagues, your peers and your customers, and you will get some naturally as well if you just read into when people are telling you things, what they're saying about you. But having an option for formal feedback allows you to self-reflect and compare with the informal feedback that you perhaps got from friends and family. Using those two together can help you to sort of structure that feedback and get a sort of 360-degree view of what people think of you, but also how you're performing against the organisation's objectives and how people find you to deal with. So 8 steps there to looking at being more effective in our self-awareness. So let's look at a couple of things we need to be aware of as we're going through those processes and those steps. Right then, so as I said, we've got 8 steps now to thinking about being more self-aware, and I just want to focus on a couple of things that we really need to be aware of as we're looking at ourselves and judging ourselves. And the first is unconscious bias. So that's unconscious bias. What is it? Everyone has it. It's natural. And we shouldn't feel bad about having it necessarily. We just need to be aware of it. Our brains store information from all our experiences, what we read, what we see on TV, what the media is pushing to us. And, we've had lots of that recently about things like fake news now that can influence people. And right from the start, as children, we start to build unconscious bias dependent on our parents' views, our upbringing, the culture or the time we were brought up in. And our brain uses these to speed up our decision making. It's a byproduct, unconscious bias. It's a way that our brain makes quick decisions by saying, well, I know that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. I've not got experience of that, so I'm going to move on to that. There are times when these quick decisions are useful, dangerous situations. We got that amygdala that we talked about in our brain when we get the fight and flight response, so we react instantaneously to a dangerous situation. However, that's not a good way to make decisions when dealing with people, business situations, or doing some planning or some problem solving. We don't want to be making rash decisions using our amygdala. So why do we still continue to do it when we shouldn't? It's because we're lazy, or our brains are lazy. When we're being stressed or under pressure, we will find easy ways to do things, and our brain just says, I'm solving a problem by doing this quickly. It disregards any experiences we got that contradict it, because that's going to take time and that's too hard to deal with. So the best thing we can do, and our first weapon against it, is being aware of unconscious bias. You can do things like implicit association tests or implicit bias tests, and we'll look at those later. And in the activity, I'm going to give you a free example which I expect you to do as part of it. But these measure our unconscious or automatic biases, and get you to examine your willingness to challenge those biases, and they're an important step in you trying to get over any stereotyping you might have that you use without realizing. So don't beat yourself up too much about it. The theory says that this all comes from our ability to determine friend or foe in our early days by automatically categorizing people and deciding what's good for us and what's not good for us. You know, we all do it unconsciously. Walking down the road, we see someone coming towards us and they look like something from a bad situation we've been in before. I don't know, they've got a certain look about them, or they're wearing certain clothes, or they've got certain tattoos or something, and it puts a fear in our mind that we don't even think about, and we may cross over to avoid that danger. So we cross over and walk down the road. The other one I think that we don't, you know, on the positive side is, if we're dog owners and we're out walking, we'll talk to people with another dog straight away because we feel we've got something in common with them. We've got no idea, but because they've got a dog, we feel that we can talk to them because we've had past experiences where that's been the case. It helps us to order our lives. It helps us to work through problems quickly, but it can, if used in the wrong situations, lead to stereotyping, prejudice, and ultimately it could lead to discrimination. These are learnt behaviours, and we shouldn't get too, like I said, we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much. There was a story recently in some training I went to where a lady from an ethnic minority was talking about how her daughter didn't believe when they went to the doctor surgery that the white lady could be the doctor, because where she'd been brought up, she'd only ever seen doctors who were from an ethnic minority. And she said to them, well, that can't be the doctor. And her mum said, why? She said, because she's white. You don't get white doctors. So there's an unconscious bias that comes just from where she was brought up and how she was working through things. So as I said, first thing we can do to overcome these unconscious bias is be aware. That is normally enough to stop them being a problem. It doesn't get rid of them. It's just that we're aware of them, and therefore we can take it into account. The second is, don't rush decisions. Take your time, consider issues properly, and then you won't be using that amygdala. Third is, justify your decisions using evidence and record the reasons for your decisions. In doing that, it'll just make sure that you're questioning yourselves. The fourth is to try and broaden the range of whatever it is you're working with. So, for example, broaden the range of people you work with so that you don't become stereotypical of the sorts of people by mixing with lots of different people, including them in different teams and different types of colleagues. You could broaden your range. The fifth is to focus on positive behaviour of people rather than negatives. We easily look at the negatives of those sort of stereotypical people that we've got, but focus on the positive behaviours. And employers should try and implement policies and procedures that limit the influence of these sort of things. So making sure there's policies and procedures in place that limit the chances. If it's written down, it's less likely that someone can just go with what comes into their head. The second thing I want us to be aware of, or that we've got to take account of, is those emotional triggers that we looked at. We did an activity earlier on about recognizing them, managing them, and coping them. That thing of when you're just about to get angry, taking 5 seconds just to take a breath before we open our mouth, and using that management and those coping strategies that we recorded should help us deal with those. So we need to be aware of our unconscious bias and take account, and we need to recognize, manage, and cope with our emotional triggers. And they're big steps in putting that self-awareness into some sort of action that's going to make some difference. Right then, so we've looked at steps we can carry out to help us be more self-aware. We've looked at some things to be aware of in our actions and what we're doing. Finally, I'd like to start looking at some tools we can use to help us do those things that make us more self-aware. So this isn't the being self-aware. These just give us the information, help us to find out more about ourselves. And the first one is psychometric tools. We've already mentioned them once, but we're talking about some sort of test, some sort of assessment that look at our personality and traits, and we'll look at a few of those. Then there's some normal management tools that are hopefully going on. If not, we can still do them. There's 360-degree feedback. We'll talk about that. And there are surveys. They could be employer surveys. They could be employees. They could be customer surveys. But they're all stuff that will give us information about what we're doing. There's some bits and pieces from coaching. So we'll look at some different tools that are used within coaching, which we can use ourselves to do some sort of self-evaluation. And then there's getting feedback from others. So over the next few slides, we'll go through those and we'll start with psychometric tests. So what is a psychometric test? We've briefly talked about them, and as we said, they are a standard and scientific method used to measure individuals' mental capabilities, behavioural styles. They're designed to look at our suitability and our personality characteristics, and the aptitude and how those can be worked on, adapted, how they fit within a particular role sometimes. And we're going to look at 4 common ones, and as we go through them, we'll indicate where they're slightly different. And like, some are for looking at roles, some are for looking at your self-evaluation of your characteristics. So we've got ILM 72, MTQ 48, MBTI, Myers-Briggs, commonly heard of, and OPQ 32. In the next few slides, we'll look at those, and then we'll move on to looking at some other tools. Right then, so we're going to start looking at some of these psychometric tests, assessments, and we're only going to briefly look at each model, but there are some links in the resources so you can do a bit more research and find out about them. And as part of the activity, you're going to be asked to do some. So ILM 72 is a behavioural model. It's measuring or assessing 2 important elements. One is the leadership style. That's your natural or preferred style, depending on your personality and characteristics. And secondly, the effectiveness or your behaviours when you use that leadership style. So one is what your natural style is, and secondly, are you using it effectively and is it working? Just because it's natural doesn't mean you are. Can be used by the employer or an organisation to match people to certain roles or to improve things, and can be used by the individual to become more self-aware of what their natural preference is, and how effective they are at utilising it. So the report from an ILM 72 will give you, as it says there, suggested areas for development. It'll identify where and how leadership style may be developed for a given situation, so what you're good at, what you're not good at. It'll identify key skills and competencies that you need to develop for that leadership to be effective, and it'll give a reflection on how effective your leadership style is with the role or the organisation that you're working in. So that's ILM 72. Like I say, there is a link in the resource which gives you more details, and we'll move on. So the next one we're going to look at is MTQ 48. This is slightly different. It's focused around testing what they define as the mental toughness. They describe that as the mindset that every person adopts in everything they do, and can closely be linked to things we would normally talk about in character as resilience, grit, etc. It's set up to measure these qualities, whereas the previous one we looked at our behaviours, how we act, and some look at attributes. Mental toughness, the one they look at, is meant to be a key driver for developing those behaviours and attributes, and research that was done for it identified 4 key components in mental toughness. They called them the 4 C's, and they are: firstly, control. What do they mean by that? Well, they're talking about life control. Do I really believe I can do the things I've set out to do, and have I got control of it, and can I deliver that? And secondly, emotional control. Can I manage my emotions and the emotions of others? So that emotional intelligence we were talking about. The second, commitment. Do I set goals, as we talked about in self-awareness? Do I promise myself to do things, and am I always working towards those goals? And the other part was achievement. Do I have what it takes to keep those promises and achieve those goals? So we're talking about inner commitment there. The third was challenge. Am I a risk taker? Will I push myself? Am I success driven, and am I prepared to take that chance? And am I learning from my experiences? Even when I get setbacks, do I learn from them and see them as a positive and take them forward as an opportunity for learning? And then confidence, am I confident in my own abilities that I can do it, or that I can acquire the skills to improve to do it? And have I got the confidence to influence others? So interpersonal confidence. Can I influence others, and can I stand my ground if needed or if challenged? So all these areas were the areas that they identified as what they termed mental toughness for the MTQ48 test. And they can lead to improvements in performance, improved positive behaviours now that we know about them, improved overall well-being, they say, because we know about ourselves, we can feel better about ourselves, and then it'll lead to us improving our aspirations. So that's MTQ48. So now we'll take a look at MBTI, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, probably one of the most common ones, and it's a personality inventory. The idea is that we can look at the theory of psychological types and make them useful and make them understandable for people in their everyday lives. The essence is that we tend to think that we do things randomly, but our behaviours aren't random. According to Myers-Briggs, they're all down to basic differences in the ways individuals prefer to use their perception or their judgment. So they use these preferences and they use the responses to those to form into 4 dichotomies. They were around extroversion and introversion, sensing or intuition, thinking or feeling, and judging or perceiving. And those indicated your personality type once they'd looked at all the responses. And they came out with 16 types. And as you can see, we've got ISTJ through to the red one, which is ESTJ, which is what I came out as. So E was for extroversion, S was for sensing, T was for thinking, and J was for judging. And I remember finding it really useful just in the fact that it told me I'd be an active organizer, that I was logical, assertive, fact-minded, decisive, practical and results orientated, systematic, etc. And I remember questioning the person who was giving me the feedback, because it's done by a trained professional, and asking that I didn't agree with some of them. And they said, yeah, but what you got to remember is some of them may have been natural ones, and then with me being in the forces, things such as fact-minded and assertive may have been trained into me. So it can look at your natural types, and it can also show you where you've changed and where you've developed. And as we talked about in that self-awareness, you sometimes need to identify what you have done in the past and what's changed and what's been good and what's been bad. So can be useful. And again, we said these are only tools. We'll move on to the next. So the VIA Strengths Survey, as it's sometimes called, or assessment, is looking at your character strengths. The VIA identifies 24 character strengths, and they make evaluations on them. It's useful to understand them because what it talks about is working out which ones are going to make you flourish. So are you deploying your highest strengths to lead you to the best? And it talks about it all being based around your well-being, and they've got this phrase PERMA, about it producing more positive emotion, more engagement, better relationships, more meaning, and more accomplishment. So the whole thing is around you feeling better about yourself, and look at your character strengths and working out how you can use them to the best of your ability, and to be the most effective at what you're trying to do. And the final one we're going to take a look at is OPQ 32. OPQ stands for Occupational Personality Questionnaire. Look at individuals' preferences and their personalities to see how they align with the job role. So as you can see, it can be used by an individual to look at how they fit, but also heavily used by employers in recruitment. Often the information from the assessment is used to explore further in subsequent interviews. So they use what they've gained from that to see how they're going to phrase their questioning and what they're going to work on and look at. Comes in 3 types that are normally used today. There's a normative one, which is just about scaling 1 to 5 reflective agreement on statements, and then these are compared with other people in similar sorts of roles or areas. So if it was a graduate one, it would be with other graduates' answers. If it was managerial, with other managerial areas, so and linked to whichever country they've come from as well. And then we've got the ipsative and the ipsative shorter format. These are just slightly different because they look at giving people 4 statements and they have to pick their best and worst out of those. And the reason employers like that one is because choosing 2 statements means that it's hard to distort what you want, so you can't learn to answer questions. You're picking your worst and your best, and then it does some sort of judgment based on that. The shorter format is just reducing the amount of questions due to the fact that the ipsative one takes a long time and the shorter one takes about 30 minutes, so it's quite attractive to employers. So that's OPQ 32. So we've looked there at a number of psychometric assessments that can help us, tools, but they're quite complicated, and a lot of them are best done by professionals who've had training. They give you a full-blown interview explaining the ins and outs of it. As I said, with my MBTI, without the interview, it would have been quite confusing. But the free ones are still good, and they still give you a window into those things and can be used as a tool. But I'd like to focus on some much simpler tools now that come from sort of coaching. We're going to look at the Wheel of Life. We're going to look at Johari window, a personal SWOT analysis, and some self-assessment cards, self-awareness cards. First of all, we'll just take a look at the Wheel of Life. So firstly, we'll look at the Wheel of Life, because I'm going to get you to do one in an activity shortly. Wheel of Life is about finding balance. Many areas in our life, isn't there, that demand our attention at different times, and it can change with projects, with instances, with things going on in our personal life, like if we're getting married or something. And whilst we need to have drive and focus on individual areas, it can get too much if we focus on one area, and it can become stressful. Many talk about the Wheel of Life as like a helicopter view of life, because we're trying to get balance. So you can see from that image where it comes from, it's like a helicopter view going around. And it's about using it as a self-evaluation tool. Life coaches often encourage people to do it when people have got issues or they're trying to sort their lives out. And we can put, it helps us to show where there's a focus or where we can put a focus on, because what we should be looking for is a balance. And as you can see with this one, it's not very balanced. It's not about scoring 10 out of 10 in each section. It's about finding a balance. What it is good, and we should be trying to get a complete circle therefore for balance, but what it is good as given a visual representation of the way our life currently is, and then you can compare it to what you would like it to ideally be. You can compare previous ones, and you can use it as a snapshot. We can also create ones based on other things that we want to focus on as well. So it could be things such as, we're going to look at one based on leadership, and in the activity I'll get you to look at one on leadership qualities or things that you should be focusing on within leadership. So it can be a good visual representation. It's a good tool. It's really easy and simple to use just for ourselves. We don't need any professionals. You can get copies of it anywhere off the internet, and I'll be showing you also some giving you some examples in the activity that we're going to discuss. So here's the activity I was just talking about. In the Word documents and the links, there's a copy of that personal Wheel of Life, the standard approach. I want you to do one and see where your focus is and see if you're very balanced. Now, remember we said about being objective. This is just for you. You've got to be objective and you've got to look at it. After you've done that, I've prepared one that's based on leadership. It's got specific leadership things in there that need to be effective, but it's up to you if you want to change them and you think there's something else that's more relevant to your role, and that's explained within the activity sheet. And then we move on to another one, which is looking at another coaching tool, the Johari window, which there's a short video to watch. So watch the video after doing your activities and uploading them, make some notes, and then we'll discuss that when we come back.